welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Gina Moffa. Gina, welcome.
Hi, guys. So great to be here. Thanks.
So Gina is a licensed psychotherapist, mental health educator, and media consultant in New York City. In practice for nearly 2 decades, she has helped thousands of people seeking treatment for trauma, grief, as well as challenging life experiences and transitions. This includes work with the Holocaust survivors at the 92nd Y, as well as being a clinical director for a Mount Sinai Hospital outpatient program specializing in addictions. Gina received her master's degree in social work with a specialty in trauma from New York University. She's the author of the book titled Moving On Doesn't Mean Letting Go, a modern guide to navigating loss. Gina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
So before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Oh, great. I am from the Hudson Valley portion of New York, the lower Hudson Valley, right along 50 miles north of New York City, and found my way back to my origins where my parents were born and raised in New York City. So here I am, not too far from home.
So did you ever spend time away from New York?
I did. I studied abroad in London and in Italy for a little bit. And so I've been mostly international if I leave New York. But for whatever reason, my lighthouse is always in New York.
Awesome. So, all right, let's dive in here. Obviously, we're going to get to the book, but how did all this start for you? This calling? I don't know if I want to call it a calling. Maybe you could call it a calling, but into therapy, into trauma specifically.
I call it a landing as much as a calling. You know, it's something I feel like I fell into. My origins were in international relations very, very long ago, and wanting to really help out with humanitarian crises and being really interested in, as you can tell with my background with Holocaust survivors, but also working in parts of Africa. And so I was always very interested in community resilience, actually, and just the idea of resilience. And so I found my way through college doing all this, but I kept coming back to the idea of human behavior and the trauma itself, and not just how to rebuild after that necessarily in a community way, but how to do it in a psychological way. Mm-hmm. And so I wound up somehow getting really interested in trauma work early on, and wound up going to NYU School of Social Work, which is a very clinical program, thankfully, and finding my way towards trauma work after that. But it was international trauma work and the International Trauma Studies program at NYU back in 2005. And at that time, it was sort of a great marriage between all the international stuff and, survivors of torture and that kind of thing, and really human behavior. And so that's sort of how it started. Through the years, it really startled me to think that we're doing all of this trauma work and we're not looking at grief. And there isn't a lot of supportive. Yeah.
We'll get there. But how did you even, you talked about this early interest in international relations and community resiliency. And then where did that come from? You just come out of the womb, boom, I'm doing it.
That's a really good question. I was early on in my life a musician. I know this sounds, that's why I'm calling this a landing. And maybe sometimes falling down the stairs in a way, and wound up transferring universities and met the first person at the cafeteria was the dean of the International Relations program. And so I decided that I really loved her and, hey, I'll give it a try. I'll take a few classes. And it really spoke to me. And I think it was the humanistic way in which she approached international relations and diplomacy and education. And I just felt like coming together, forming community, and being a part of understanding where people are coming from with curiosity was something that I would really piqued my interest in those early classes, which really threads its way to what I do now as a therapist, that sense of curiosity. And so it all really does mix up.
What about that humanistic way that she approached it? And what specifically about what she was doing got you?
I think it was just what I was talking about, the curiosity, looking at how two countries, now I'm really taking us off track, but, two countries such as the United States and Japan, even, here we are, dropping an atomic bomb and later on, forming the Fulbright Scholarship and inviting Japan as the first country to join it, and maintaining that sense of like, oh no, we did this thing. How are we going to come back together in a sense? And using education and curiosity and people, real civilians, to form a sense of peace and understanding between people. But mostly it was always the curiosity. So yeah, I got in the trenches with that one.
No, this is what this podcast is about. I mean, this is what, what I want to know is the minutia, the details of what makes you this super inspiring, interesting person. I mean, this is what people listen to. So, all right, you were what did you play? What kind of music did you play?
I was a singer most of my life. Since I was a little baby Gina. I played piano and violin as well. But I was a singer my entire life, sang on a children's album with Carole King's daughter, did a duet with Carole King as a little Gina. So I always thought my life would be going towards music, and it still is. And I still sing and I do charity shows in New York City as well. But, career-wise, I didn't need a diploma to tell me that I could sing. And so I wound up leaving that. But and my life is so much richer. It's got all of these elements. And because of music, I bring a lot of that into my work as well. But yeah, it is the country roads, as they say, to getting where we are.
So how did things unfold such that you moved more towards the trauma work and so forth?
I think it was listening to individual stories and, volunteering with people who were seeking asylum in the United States and really wanting to understand how they were going to rebuild and how they were going to move forward and what was in them, what strengths did they have, and what was their support system like. And I think those sort of questions that I was asking of them, and I was more curious in what was inside them that they could keep on going. And when I realized that, I realized I needed to go into something that was going to lead me to a more clinical route, which is why I chose social work, because it felt to me like I could still do the advocacy that I wanted to do, and still get educated in that way, but also still have that clinical aspect and really get in there and look at and understand human behavior and resiliency and, how we heal. Just how we heal as humans, and everybody's different based on our histories and so many different factors.
Yeah, I mean that's a good segue into the book. But before we get there,
I didn't mean to do that.
No. I'm just really intrigued by many things of what you're saying. So when you first were intrigued and curious about how people survived and were resilient, I mean, that's amazing. But it's different when you're sitting down in front of someone, and a survivor, and they're telling you these incredible, horrific stories. What was that like for you when you first started to hear these stories?
I think that I felt like I was out of my league. I felt like I didn't know what to do with the story. I wanted to jump into savior, solution, resolution mode. I wasn't trained, but also the human instinct is to help in any way possible. And doing is a very American thing. And so I felt incredibly helpless. But I felt like, Gina, what did you get yourself into? And how are you going to help this person who's got a much bigger thing going on in their life than you just sitting here volunteering your time to help her with the biggest decision of her life, for example. But I definitely felt like one of the things about trauma work was not something I was able to do at that particular time early in my career, which is witness and not jump into action and not just want to be the superhero. It's not about me, right? And so that was a lesson very early in my student days, which I think we still learn that along the lines, when to do and when to witness and when to just be present, all of that. But
thank you for that. Let's start talking about the book here. So it's called Moving On. Moving On Doesn't Mean Letting Go, A Modern Guide to Navigating Loss. How did this book come about?
This book came about because, if we're taking the country roads about trauma and grief, I started doing a lot of trauma work in my private practice, and trauma work inevitably led to more grief work, which I had been doing prior. And I was doing it now with a little bit of a younger population. And so during the pandemic, I was getting calls from all over the world and all over the country for people who were going through major loss, not just death losses like we would assume, but, other losses like loss of job, loss of home, loss of identity, breakups and divorce, of course, so much of that. Even friendship loss has been an incredibly popular topic coming into my practice. And between sessions, so I work with a population of really high functioning emerging adults, and they were saying, okay, this is great, but I need something in between sessions that's going to sort of help me along the way. I'm feeling really out of control. I need to control things. Now, understandably, we live in New York City, and this is a thing to be able to get things done, and also kind of a Western society ideal. And so one of my clients said to me, do you have any books to recommend? And I recommended some, and in the topic of grief and with the topic of grief and trauma. And they came back and they said, these are good, but not speaking to me. And I need something that will speak to this lifestyle that we're in right now. And they said, everything you say in session, I resonate with it. I jive with it. Like, why don't you write it? And I laughed, and time went by. And then I kind of kept hearing that, and I thought to myself, all right, I don't have enough of that sense of ego to say, I'm going to write the book that fills in the gap. That's not my personality.
Let me interrupt you. What was that gap you're talking about that they were expressing?
The gap is that sense of agency over something that's a really unpredictable journey. So what I mean by that is so many traditional books on grief will talk about how grief is not linear, which is true. There's no timeline. It's not linear. It's messy. It lasts as long as it lasts. That is all true. And yet, for a young emerging adult who doesn't have anyone else in their life who's experiencing loss, to have something that unpredictable and to say, you know what, your journey is going to be what it is. And you've just got to feel it for as long as you feel it. And your whole life is upside down right now. And that's okay because that's normal. That doesn't fly. And so what it was is, okay, how do we give somewhat of a map, somewhat of a structure to something that is structureless and unpredictable? And so the book in my mind was to say, okay, what do I do week by week in therapy with, X amount of people? And these people are the people who need that sense of structure, because being out flailing about on their own in a state of grief and or traumatic loss is like a death sentence to them in some ways. And so the book for me is as close to being in grief therapy and trauma therapy with me as one can get, which means I have tools and exercises, but I also share, I've been around the block. I lost my mom a few years ago, and I failed miserably as at grief, and so I sort of give a little bit of kind of what I did wrong and what I would do differently and what I learned from it. But it speaks to a lifestyle that needs a sense of something to hold on to. So that to me is sort of the gap, is really, let's give you a sense of agency, even if in theory there isn't any, but it only matters that you have something to hold on to.
Let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with Gina Moffa. We're going to pause a moment here to thank our sponsors. All right. So it's really interesting what you're saying. You said about how grief is not linear and it's going to take however long it takes. And you said, we know when I'm telling this to these people, that doesn't fly. That's really interesting because it speaks to the difference between, what might be true on paper, but isn't true in the moment. I think that's really, really interesting how you even identified that, number one. So let's break it down. How do you address that in the book?
Sure. Well, I address it by saying what the truth is, which is the truth is grief is not linear. It will be different for everyone, depending on your culture, all of this. Also, that it's important that we find a sense of safety. Not everybody either has the luxury, the time, or the safety to grieve, right? We can take that for granted that we have bereavement leave, even for 3 days. Some people don't get that. And so, I start out by really just acknowledging all the barriers to grieving and all of the things that will make it really scary. And that feels important. Safety is a really big repetitive theme throughout my book because a lot of people either compare themselves to other people who've lost someone, compare themselves to people who have everything going for them and have everything, or they feel pressured and have the expectations from people around them to hurry up and get this grief process over with. And,
I laugh, but
it's true. I mean, this is
right.
it, and the platitudes that society comes out with, like, well, this, it's better that they're not suffering, or, hey, it could be worse, or, you'll get another dog, or, hey, maybe you'll get pregnant on the next round. People are really thoughtless. And so part of the book is a teaching experience for people who are supporting somebody grieving, which is saying, hey, I know you have good intentions, but maybe let's try it a different way. Mm-hmm. And here's what they're experiencing. But also as a griever, to sort of get to know your needs, to look at your grief honestly, to look at your part in something, to look at your life as a whole. What was my life like before this loss? How did I cope with hard things and hard situations before this loss? What are the strengths I have in me to keep going in this loss? And what are the things that I think hold me back? Maybe I ruminate, maybe I have wishful thinking and magical thinking over this loss. Or maybe you're grieving something or someone that you had a really abusive, horrific relationship with. And now you're grieving these different layers of that. And really, it's just the understanding and acknowledgement that grief is messy, grief is nuanced, grief is layered, and grief is incredibly individual. And yet within that, here are some things that we can do. You can get to know your needs. Most of us, when we're in a state of loss, don't know what we need. And it feels really crazy making because I may want to be alone 1 minute and 5 minutes later feel utterly isolated and existentially alone and say, oh my God, I need to be around people. Or I may be invited to a wedding that I really want to go to, but at the last minute, I need help trying to figure out how to get out of that because now my loss is creating panic attacks in me. And it's really understanding also that grief is a full body experience. And so a lot like my own experience, grief showed up more physically for me in physical symptoms and teaching people what that is and understanding.
What does it mean to grieve? What does that mean?
Really, the idea of grieving is that it is a full body response and a full body natural response to any kind of significant loss. But what that looks like is different for everyone. But it can be a number of physical symptoms that come up. It can be a behavior, right? Somebody can grieve and still be somebody who keeps very busy or exercises nonstop or, has to go out and, I have a client who loves to hike and people are like, oh, so-and-so is not really grieving. Well, actually they are. And this is how that process is within their body. Like a tab always running in the background. We don't escape our grief, right? But there are different ways that we all can go about it, but it also manifests in different ways. And so it can look like rumination. It can look like, traumatic symptoms such as nightmares, or, being preoccupied and all of that. And it could look like you're just having emotional sensations like sadness and you're kind of just going through what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross originally set out for the terminally ill, but now has been adopted by people grieving, which, with all due respect to her, was a great jumping off point for sure, but doesn't encapsulate the whole of the messiness. So grieving really does look different for everyone. And the idea of it as a verb is nearly impossible to encapsulate because it is all of it. It's the movement, it's the rhythms, it's the ways you cope, it's your sensations.
I'm assuming there's a difference between intentional grieving and unintentional. Can we just, because a lot of times people are like, you're not allowing yourself to grieve. You're not feeling, you're not allowing yourself to feel, you're not allowing yourself to be sad. We often hear that in our culture.
Absolutely.
What do you say to that?
What do I say to that is that grief will come whether we want it to or not. It's just how it pops up, right? Using myself as an example, when my mother died, I didn't have time to grieve, quote unquote. And I also thought, because I worked with grief for so long, I knew how to do it. So I didn't have to do it like everyone else did. Right. I was at the head of the class, right? So I could stand there with my victory flag until I wound up in the hospital with pancreatitis and hypothyroidism. And, so for me, I thought I was getting off scotch-free, and I wound up getting incredibly sick over the period of a few months. And, saying to myself, I guess I'm not exempt from this grief class, after all, in this particular way. And how pompous of me to even think that I could, have a one up on what is a very human universal wound. So, I do think that we think sometimes that we're getting away from something, or we're compartmentalizing it, or we're pushing it somewhere. But really, it doesn't go away for very long before it comes up involuntarily in whatever way, happens. Either some people will have some sort of breakdown, or you have a physical symptom come up, or, your memory starts going. So you're making mistakes easier, but it will come up whether or not we want it to.
Well, if we use you as an example, was your hospitalization due to the fact that you weren't acknowledging what was going on or accepting what was going on?
I think it could have been both, really. I think I could intellectually for sure acknowledge that I'd lost my mother. I was making plans around it. I was writing her eulogy. All of that was happening. But I think emotionally, number one, I wasn't taking care of my body. I wasn't, drinking enough water. I was probably eating a bit of steak and drinking red wine at the time. We're Italian. That was sort of a thing during that period of time. And I just wasn't doing what I would normally do to take care of myself and nourish my body, and also check in with myself. Even as a therapist, I'm always saying, okay, sorry, my lights are going off here.
Oh, no worries.
But I would say to myself, hey, where are we at today? Put my hand on my heart, just check in with myself. What do we need? I wasn't doing that. And I think, even the smallest check-in with ourselves can really do something. I wasn't doing it. I wasn't taking care of my body. And I remember going to my GP, saying why is all of this happening? And I said, do you think this could be grief? Is this some byproduct of grief that I don't know about in all of my years of doing grief work? And my doctor said, how long is it since your mom died? And I said, I think, it's a couple months now. And he's like, no, you're fine. You're over that. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, number one, this is the problem with the medical field. Sidebar. But many of us are so grief illiterate, in different ways. But it was a moment for me to say, yeah, I actually think this is the way this is manifesting. Because I'm not taking care of my body, and because I am shoving down emotions because I have so much to do, this is coming up for me physically. And I think there's a lot of merit to understanding the ways that grief comes up physically for us. I'm not saying that everybody will have such a dramatic experience.
Sure.
But even just the idea that you start getting headaches or gastrointestinal issues, it's really important to just take notice of your body and to understand that grieving takes endurance. And it's a lot more physical endurance than it is anything else. And so I learned it the hard way. And so I want to help people to not go in that direction as best I possibly can.
I want to thank you for sharing that, because that sounds really intense. I mean, and to hear your GP say that, I mean, I'm not surprised, but
Right.
unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of times. You mentioned this emerging adult category of the people you're working with. I want to get to that, but first I want to ask you about this idea of, oftentimes when people think of grief, naturally, commonly we think of passing of a loved one, but as you mentioned, there's a lot of different types of grief. And recently I got divorced, which was crazy for me. And as soon as I mentioned it to people, and a lot of people were saying, and I know this was with the best of intentions, but it's hard now, but you'll move on, you'll get over it. It was the best thing that's happened to me, and again, I know that people are trying, but like, I found that, like, what? I'm not even there. I can't even think about what's going to happen, how this is going to be the best for me. This sucks, So I think oftentimes people don't know what to say. They want to help, like you said, the human instinct is to help, but it's oftentimes it feels like a hot potato. How do we deal with this?
It's so true. I'm sorry you experienced that, Guy.
Yeah, thanks.
And it is hard, and it's a grieving period. And I think people are so uncomfortable with not knowing what to do and not knowing what to say that they either say nothing or they say all the wrong things because they want to give you hope.
Right.
But unfortunately, and I say this a lot, and this feels like a very big passion of mine, is to teach about grief in a way that we can change generational relationships with the way that we grieve and the way we approach grievers, because it's not a disease, right? But we want to get away from it as quickly as we can. And so I call it the platitude trap in my book, one of the chapters, because it is all about good intentions, but met all the wrong way, right? So I'm a griever, or I'm going through a divorce, and I want to feel connected, and I want to feel seen, and I want someone to validate my situation. And they want so much to do that, but they don't know what to say. So they say all the wrong things, and now two people fall into a trap, and nobody connects. And, and it really has to do with the way that we're taught. None of us were taught, even for myself early on, not really knowing what to say when people died, to the loved ones. Or divorce, to me, it's like, oh my goodness, what, as a kid or something, what do you say to that? Congratulations. Or, it's all really
could be
for some people, right? It's a really, just like any loss, it's a really individual and unique experience. So it's really important to say, hey, Guy, how is it feeling for you? What is your experience? And I bet it's changed from day to day. It's a lot of rediscovering and rebuilding and feeling like you're free falling in a way, and you don't know where you'll land. You will, but you don't know where. You don't know how. And so all we look for is somebody to provide that safe space or that safe landing for just a moment, just one connection that can feel like I can just be validated. I could just be heard. I can just be tenderly held in whatever it is my experience is right now. And I just feel like we need more conversations around this in general. We need permission to mess up, but we also need permission to connect and be real with one another without judgment, without expectation, without rushing us through it. So that's my hope. I'm working on it.
So as we kind of wind down here, I want to kind of touch back to these emerging adults. What is it about these people that are just swarming to you and your incredible work? Who are these people?
Swarming, what a word. Word of mouth in New York City. Not a lot of people. I don't have many grief referrals in New York City, so I think I happen to be one of them that people have used, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I should add, but yeah, I don't really know why they've swarmed to me. I am pretty active on Instagram, and I pride myself on creating a little bit of a community there and being really present. I don't know what it is, but I do feel really identified with young adults in this way. People trying to build a life and individuate and find themselves in this new world, in a very fast-paced world, which is a hard place to be. You know, even adults, we've all lost our sense of attention. We have no attention spans. You know, I'm doing something and someone says, okay, you can make that reel, but don't make it more than 7 seconds. People will stop listening.
Right.
And it's true, you know, and it's sad, and it's true, and it's sad. And yet you sort of have to go with that flow, or you get lost in the stream, you know, downstream. But this is a really special group of people, and they're people who want to heal early. They want to be present in the work. They want to change familial unhealthy patterns. They want to be themselves and be able to create healthy boundaries and have rewarding and fulfilling relationships and find meaning in a way that feels authentic and honest to them. And that is amazing, because I come from a generation of family members who didn't speak what their feelings were, had no idea what family patterns were, you know, didn't understand how to create a healthy boundary if it hit them in the face, you know? Mm-hmm. And so to me, this is such a noble path that they're taking, that I really, not only do I respect it, but I revere the work that they come in and do and find presence with. So this book for me, although not just for emerging adults, for sure, I just wanted to give something back in a way that met them where they were, because people are looking to heal. People want to heal in a way that many people have never, you know, we want to heal in a way we never have seen before in this society. And I think it's brave and courageous and also scary as hell. And so as therapists, if we can meet people where they are in this way and be able to say, okay, you know, this is a messy experience we're going to have, and it will feel worse before it gets better, and you've got to stick with it. And if you can commit to this, you will have the most rewarding inner journey you've ever had, and your whole life will be changed because of it. But yet it's unending and messy, you know, when you can say that and they still show up, you have to create a bridge for them in some way. And that's what I hope my book does. And, you know, even if it's a bridge for just one broken heart, you know, one broken grieving heart, that's my goal. It's my aim.
Wow. Amazing. The book is Moving On. Moving On doesn't mean letting go, a modern guide to navigating loss. Excuse me. Gina, you are incredible. How are you working with other therapists? What are you doing? And where can people find you?
I wish I were working with other therapists. If you want to work with me, please reach out. I am just in private practice. It's a little bit of a lonely endeavor, but I can be reached and found at ginamoffa.com. I'm also on Instagram if you want to join my community there and say hello. It's at Gina Moffa, LCSW, but I welcome it. I'm doing a lot of speaking these days, but especially with my book coming out in just a few weeks now. But it's wonderful to connect with colleagues. So it's the best.
Awesome. We'll have this linked up here at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. We'll have your book. We'll have your website. Thank you so much for being here. It was a delight meeting you, and I'd love to have you back at a later time.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks for coming with me on these country roads.
Yeah, definitely. Take care.
You too. Thank you.